Hello everybody, welcome to our Writer in Residence session this evening. Tonight we have Christina Longden, our Writer in Residence, and we've got Lorna from our Local Studies Department in Huddersfield Library, and we've got Dave, a history teacher and head of Year 9 from Honley High School. So a big welcome to everybody tonight. Okay, today's session will be celebrating Local and Community History Month. And if you'd like to find out a bit more about it, I've got the website here and also the hashtag as well. And okay, so I'll hand over to Christina now, who will be introducing today's session for us.
Thank you, Nicola. Hello, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And yeah, normally on the Writer in Residence sessions, I tend to focus on the process of writing, on writers and authors, but also on really good subject matter that can provide some oomph for your writing. So what could be better than your own local and community history? So that's what we're going to be talking about this evening, and we've got a lot to get through, so I won't try and talk too fast. But you might have seen a previous talk that I did with Bruce Crowther, who is the founder of Fair Trade Towns, and we talked about life writing, memoirs, autobiographies. So if you're interested in that aspect of writing about history, you might want to go and have a little nosy at that on the Kirklees Library's YouTube channel. But first of all, Nicola's going to put up a few slides to kind of talk around to illustrate what we're doing. And the two most recent history books that I've written were very much a product of my dad's research, really. My dad was always interested in family history, and when he was made redundant, he decided to look into his family history, and he turned up this incredible amazing story, which was all about my great grandfather who had converted to Islam in 1898, and the family had hidden it. It had been covered up. So I decided to go and excavate it, and I didn't decide to go and do that till a few years ago. So the interesting thing was, and I think this is an aspect that we're going to return to again and again in over the next hour, is local and community history just for older people? And I think, unfortunately, it seemed to have been badged with that over recent years. But what we want to do is to try and bring that back to younger people and to get them to connect with the older generation so they can start sharing this information. Obviously, once you've left work and once you become retired, you have more time to look into some of these issues. But I really do believe that an interest in local and community history starts when you're very young. And it's very much about who you are, who your family are, where you come from, your sense of identity. And you're only really going to get that from the adults in your life and from your grandparents and from your community. Sometimes you can get it from your teachers if you're lucky and you've got a great teacher like Dave at Honley High. And those little seeds that you may not be interested in when you're young, but they start dropping into your life about what were those mills for? What did they make in them? Who was this Lowry person? Who in our family fought in the war? And what was a conscientious objector? And who owned this particular old house? And you might never explore any further than, I remember the gran saying this. And it's only when you're older that you start maybe having time to look into it a little bit more. So I think it's really important that young people are made very welcome in our archives and in local community history groups and encouraged to attend. And it doesn't really matter whether you come from the area. I'm a comer in. I'm sure we'll return to that later on. I'm a comer in this area. I'm from the Manchester, Stalybridge, and Duckinville side of the Pennines that way. So it's taken me a while to try and get my head around the history here. I'm very familiar with the history over there. And also, a lot of people we need to remember in this country from immigrant backgrounds as well. So they might not necessarily feel, well, this is my community because I've only lived here for 20, 30, 40 years. And I think, people need to remember that we've all got that in common. A lot of us have moved around. One example that I absolutely love is the Bolton Immigration Project. This is hold it up here, a fantastic group of migrants, the first Asian migrants to the area, who are so into not just their own collective history from overseas, from moving here, but the area they live in Bolton. It's a wonderful collection of photographs. They've got two collections of this, and I always tell everybody about the people in Bolton and what they've been doing. So I think what we've just been discussing ourselves before we went live on this. We were talking a lot about when you're younger, you tend to hear more about the macro history, about the big world events, and you really can get captivated with them. You know, the world wars, revolutions, communism, Nazism, Western powers, and that's become more dominant the last few years for various reasons. I'd argue because of the lack of investment in school education. There has been less and less focus on regional and local and social history, and there's decreasing demand for courses at university, perhaps because of this. And it's a shame, because it tends to be that as you get older, it's only then that you realise history is built at the everyday level, at the local level. The personal is political. The people that make the big history are the local people. That's where it's built. So I've also found it, having studied it at university level, it's a lot more interesting to excavate history on your own doorstep. And it's the undiscovered stuff, the hidden stuff, the not the big stuff, that is harder to find and actually more rewarding. And certainly in terms of my own family history, that has been the fascinating bit, because this is a working class family that we're talking about. It is a lot harder and ultimately a lot more rewarding and a lot richer to write and to read about people whose lives have not seen the light of day until recently. So as time kicks in and you get older and you realize that your elders are no longer going to be there to ask questions of, I would argue it's more important than ever to partner with younger people and to encourage them to write history together. So this is another reason as to why we're talking about the archives today, and this is why we've got Lorna from the archives and from the local studies to give us a bit of a flavour and to tempt you into, certainly when doors are open, for you to go back to the libraries, but also to have a look online, the resources that are available to you. Just what Honley High are going to be doing as well, and Dave will tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. So if we could have a little look at the next slide, please, Nicola. I'll tell you when I first discovered the archives. That beautiful building there, the red brick, is Stalybridge Library, but it used to also be the local studies library for the Tameside area. And I had no choice other than to go into the archives when I was doing my dissertation for university, because my tutor, Carl Chin, who was on a previous talk about the Peaky Blinders on Kirklees libraries, suggested that the best study of history is using your local history and using your local archives. So I ended up studying something called popular radicalism, which sounded really boring, but it actually turned out to be fascinating, because it was all about working class rights, the votes, Chartism, the poor law, standing up against the government. That's what I did my dissertation in the old archives. The photograph below is the new archives, which is in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is where I did all of my research on the Robert Stanley books. And that's my auntie there. That's Auntie Gay, who is a family history expert. And that's her helping somebody to do their own family history research. So I had a wonderful time in the archives, and I found it fascinating. And I would say it is absolutely addictive. And it sounds crazy to think you can get addicted to this sort of thing, but anybody that is into local history and family history, I'm sure they will agree with me. So what I did was I spent a lot of time in the archives, because Robert was working class. Even though he was a mayor from 1874 to 1876, there was absolutely nothing in our family that had been kept on him. There were no records, there was nothing written. We had the odd little thing which turned out to be a fez, but you have to read the book to find out about why he had a fez and how we found out about that. So I had to go to the archives and trawl through the records that they'd been kept. And that very old tattered book there is the town council minutes for Stalybridge from the 1870s. So I had to read through those pages and pages and pages. And then one day, and it was one day, I finally found his signature, which you can see there, and that's my son proudly showing the town council minutes. Poor Gregory got dragged into the archives as well. It's a family thing. But if it wasn't for the archives, I would never have seen his handwriting. I would never have been able to access newspapers, which was the first time I heard his voice. Because in the newspapers in the 19th century, for example, he was a magistrate, and they would report verbatim what he had said, word for word. So it was the first time I'd actually got to know this person and the way that he spoke and his views on things. So this wonderful building up in the top right hand corner, I'm sure many of you know, this is Huddersfield Central Library, which is where the local studies library is as well. Beautiful building. So that is hopefully where some of you might be heading in a couple of months when things are open and a little bit more back to normal. Can we have the next slide, please, Nicola? So I'll just start off, for those of you that haven't really looked into it before, a quick whistle-stop tour of the things that perhaps you want to look at if you've got an interesting family history story or you want to find them. First of all, find out, have you got a family tree? Has somebody done it already? Are you going to be reinventing the wheel? Ask around. Interview relatives, which is something that a lot of young people are encouraged to do for obvious reasons. The family tree will only tell you so many things. It's the individuals and their stories that need to be delved into a little bit more. There are a lot of books as well, which I think some of us forget. Most of our local libraries already have lots of local history books there that you can either take out or you can sit in the library and read as well. And of course, in the local studies libraries in Huddersfield or in your Tameside libraries, there will be plenty of local history books that'll just get you started. Something else, if you're not able to travel, go to the library, is Facebook is fantastic for local history sites, and not just your local sites, but also community pages and what I call the tribal pages. So you've got certain interest groups, social history. The Everyday Muslim is a fantastic website and Facebook resource to do with whatever your city and town. Bradford's a great one as well. So also, if you're interested in specific I suppose workplace, a specific area, rural areas, that's somewhere we can start wetting your whistle, as it were. And then once you get a little bit further on into your research, that's when I would say have a wander down to your local studies and your archives. I'm going to let Lorna take over in a minute and talk about all the things like the books and the magazines and the photos, the online research portals, accessing the censuses, the archive collections, the council minutes. The other thing, and I'm sure Lorna can tell you a little bit more about this, but in Tameside, for example, I've just sat there and earwigged so many conversations between family history and local history volunteers who will give up their time and come and sit with you and talk you through. Maybe you've hit a brick wall in your own research and they'll show you what to do. So they're just worth their weight in gold. And also there's lots of family histories and local history societies. We're so lucky in Huddersfield in particular and in Tameside to have a group of people who just do this for the love of it, and they will share their expertise with you as well. Now, after that, this is with my writer head on. If you do want to write something like I've done, I really would recommend you join a local writers group. We're very fortunate in our area. We've got quite a lot to improve your writing skills, to look at how you can get published and improve your editing skills, maybe your layout skills, just for that sense of camaraderie and support, really. Next slide, please, Nicola. So these were my hallelujah, you can't read it there, but these were my hallelujah moments in the archives. The Microfiche newspapers, unfortunately, in Stalybridge, where I was researching. A lot of the northern newspapers have not yet been digitised by the British Archives, which made me very cross because it meant I had to sit in front of an old-fashioned Microfiche reader doing this and ruining my eyesight completely. Can't type in Robert Stanley's name or anything else I was interested in, and I had to literally go through thousands and thousands of pages scanning them for names of people that I was interested in. But they were wonderful because rather than honing in on a specific incident, I could start going down rabbit holes and looking across. And I found out so much stuff from those undigitized newspapers. Although I really do wish they were digitized, please. British Library, please do that for us. The council minutes as well, I showed you before, that again, those were examples of, I could see Robert actually writing the minutes sometimes when I got to know his handwriting, and the amazing stuff that was going on that just isn't included a lot of the time in the local history books that might have been written by somebody else. So it's really important to go back to those primary sources yourself. Just it's a joy to actually have access to them and to be able to read them. The census addresses, there's two pictures up there in the top right hand corner of the bread riots in Stalybridge. Again, a piece of history that's been completely forgotten until recently. We've been excavating a little bit more. It was all to do with the Lancashire cotton famine and Lincoln blockading the transportation of the cotton to Lancashire. And through the census records, we were able to find my great-great-great-grandfather's shop. And lo and behold, on the illustration up there in the top left-hand corner, that was his shop, which was attacked and looted. And that's a tiny picture of my dad and my son standing outside the very shop. So you can piece all of this together. It's like a fantastic, huge, big jigsaw puzzle of your very own, with your own roots and your own DNA involved. And one tip that that I found to be personally very important, even though I was lucky enough to be able to study history at university. From my generation, I think we were taught history in quite a different way to the previous generation. Timelines seemed to be less important. So it became very important to me to look at a specific aspect of history and to look at the timeline of that history and the individuals that were involved. So when I was researching my great-great-great-grandfather's life, I was convinced that he knew Prophet John Roe of Bradford, who was an amazing, fascinating character, and Joseph Rayner Stevens, and Abdullah Quilliam, who founded the first mosque in Liverpool. And it was through knowing the timeline that I was able to sort of scan across and find who he knew and when he knew them. And they were the hallelujah moments for me. Also, visiting the parliamentary archives, I found out some fascinating stuff about my great-great-grandfather, and he'd been called to Parliament as a witness to try and introduce the secret ballot for voting to protect the rights of the working men, because it was men at the time with the vote. And again, just bumping into other researchers in the archives who've got a side interest to you and might know something that you don't. And I think the classic one is something that I stumbled across through the Who Do You Think You Are magazine. You get all kinds of great tips from people. And there was a tip in there that said, when you're trying to find the death certificate or the marriage certificate, don't just head for the national the registries to try and access them, but look for the local registrars, and you might get the actual signatures of the people involved. And lo and behold, when I got my great-great-grandmother's death certificate, who else but Emmeline Pankhurst had signed it. So that was great, because I had a hunch, because they lived around the corner from her, that they might have known her anyway. So they'd obviously encountered each other, which again was just a wonderful piece of history in itself for our family. So next slide, please. So just to summarise, I'm going to hand over to the other two now for a bit of a chat. Get your pen and pencil out for the next bit, because we're going to be throwing around lots of ideas, lots of websites, lots of things that you might want to look up. But one important date, Thursday the 5th of August, I'm going to be interviewing Catherine Waugh, who, if you don't know her, you should, because she's a fantastic young woman, Yorkshire lass, and she has been producing her own films on her own YouTube channel. It's called Yorkshire's Hidden Histories YouTube, and she does these brilliant videos, and she was kind of born and bred on horrible histories, and it's all Yorkshire focused. And I'm going to be interviewing her kind of to celebrate Yorkshire Day, really, on Thursday the 5th of August. So jot that one down, and please do visit us and listen to her tales, because she's writing a book at the moment. And also, don't forget, September is going to be Heritage Open Day month for the whole of the country, so lots of wonderful freebies for those of you who want to go and out and about to visit. So I'm now going to hand over to the others and bring Dave in. I think what I would like to ask Dave is, as head of year 9?
Year 9, yeah.
9 history. What is it that you're trying to do at the high school in terms of generating more interest in local and community history?
Well, I mean, it's something that we've been trying to develop since I joined the school 4 years ago. The curriculum that we teach is very rich, very varied, as both your children will attest to, I'm sure. But the one thing that seems to be missing is a focus on local history, and it's finding the appropriate places to develop that, and also finding the resources to allow us to do so. And that's why I was thrilled when you got in touch and asked me to be part of this, because effectively we had a planning meeting last week for this session, and just in that hour, the amount of ideas that Lorna, who'll be talking in a moment, shared, blew me away. And this week I've been just telling anyone who'll listen at work, whether it's a child or a colleague or whoever, that just how many resources there are out there. And so really I'm here to listen more than I am to speak. I want to hear ideas about how we can develop it, how we can find out more about the history of Honley and the surrounding area. I mean, one thing that we are aware of and that we'd really love to develop is the fact that Honley High School, then Honley Grammar, was an evacuation school. It took pupils from Van Deen School in Brighton. And just from the one newspaper article that we can find about it, there's just this amazing tapestry of stories about people who came here ostensibly for 6 months to a year, and for various reasons ended up staying here. And one must think that if they came and stayed, then maybe they stayed for longer, and perhaps their descendants are still amongst us, really. And if that's the case, then potentially we could have staff or pupils who are related to these people, and suddenly it opens up this huge just this huge opportunity to start digging into the local history. So the evacuation thing is certainly something that we could embed very quickly into our teaching, because in year 9 we teach about the Blitz, we teach about the evacuation experience, particularly, of course, about people being evacuated from London. But now that we know that people were evacuated from Brighton to here, suddenly it makes it more personal. And there's a few things that you've mentioned already, Chris, that kind of jump out at me. I think, this idea of ownership, this idea of, a lot of the time, certainly early on, when in year 7, they might say, well, why are we learning this? Why do we have to learn about this element of history? And it's this idea of, who does history belong to? Well, it belongs to them. It's their history, as much as it belongs to me as a history teacher or you as an historian. So really, I think that's what the power of local history could be. It's about making pupils realise that not only are they living history, but they're living with history all around them. And that, to me, is hugely exciting and very inspiring, and could really quite revolutionise the way that we teach and the content that we're teaching. So
that's fantastic, and that is exactly what I have come to see. I've got 2 children who are fascinated in history, and I've deliberately tried not to encourage them to be, because I don't necessarily want them to have my interest in life, to impose. But they have. But they know so much more than I do.
She's fantastic. So yeah.
Don't ever take me to a pub quiz and expect me to do well in history, because I'm really focused on, and yet theirs is so much broader, because they've got access to things like horrible histories. Whatever you think of that, it's created this generation of kids that are really into it. And it's like you're saying with World War II, what we tend to see is, for example, in Meltham, they've got the 1940s like celebration, and then over the hill in Uppermill, it's a huge thing. And what I love is we're almost looking at it from a generational perspective, which is, this is what we celebrate here, and this is this aspect of history. And we get a load of kids now who are going to come in and say, well, actually, did you know there were evacuees here? I wonder what happened to them. And then they're teaching us about it, which I think is the brilliant bit that you want to focus on a bit more, because they can become little kind of mini masters of a certain aspect of history that you and I don't know about. And that is I think the really liberating thing about history is, you become specialist in a certain area a lot sooner than in a lot of the other subjects that you taught about at school, if you give them permission to go and do that research. And family history is, the one particular bit that I think you've got your family tree there with you, haven't you?
I mean, what you just said is exactly what history education should be. We're teaching it to them so that they can then pass it on.
Yeah.
Because the very nature of history is, obviously, eyewitnesses eventually die, and they die out, and the whole point is to pass on experience so that they pass it on to the next generation. And that is something I say in class a lot. That's why I'm teaching it to you, so that for posterity, so that we as humans and as a society don't forget these things. And it is great at parents' evening when a parent says that they've gone home and they're teaching it to their parents. So it's not just going down the timeline, it's going up as well. But yeah, I mean, I'll show it now, actually, because you've mentioned family trees. Nowadays, family trees just on the internet, and it's very, very easy. This is something I've had for, about 20 odd years, because my granddad in the 90s, I think, so when I was a lad, did our family tree, and this is what it included. That is all of the research that it included. And what you've got there is quite literally hundreds of letters, handwritten and then typewritten actual family trees on huge bits of paper. I have no idea how he did it, but it's the perseverance. And to most people, there's nothing interesting in there. But to me, it's the most fascinating box that I own. There's just, every time I dip into it, there's a new thing to discover. There's loads of letters in here from Catherine Cookson, the author, because his mother worked with her in some hospital laundry room, and they hated each other. They weren't friends, but they knew each other very well. And he found this out. He wrote to Catherine Cookson, and she was quite honest. She said, your mother was a very difficult lady to get along with. However, she had worked hard, I respected her. And him and Catherine Cookson had this ongoing correspondence about my great grandmother, and it's just really deeply moving to read it, even though she sounds like a bit of a difficult character, you know. And I'm sure Cookson gave as good as she got. And it's the thing you just said about seeing Robert's signature for the first time. Well, funnily enough, my granddad was called Robert, and he was the second Robert. My dad was the third, and his dad was the first. So Bob the second, we call it.
Yeah.
And it's full of his handwriting. It's absolutely full of handwritten letters. That's really, really moving to read.
Yeah.
It makes you, because he died when I was about 16, and I miss him deeply. But having that gives you a connection to your family, and it gives you just a real sense of where you come from. And if you don't know where you come from, I truly believe you've got no idea where you're going, basically. So
I think it is. You're right, and it's almost about dropping these little things in about curiosity that hopefully at some point a child will pick up. Like this here, I think you can all see that this tiny little dictionary was my great granddad's. And Greg was asking me the other day, why on earth would somebody want something so stupid and tiny, you know? But this was, you know, this is how everything was in those days. You know, it was a little pocket thing, you know, because you couldn't whip out your phone and do that. And it's just, you know, I just feel a sense of duty and responsibility to say that was your grandmother's. I drive them, you know, potty whenever we're out and about and we're talking about something's happened in the world. I go, 1877. That was the year that Robert Rashid, and they go, oh. But I don't care, you know. At some point, this will become important to them, and it is then. And I just think it's really important to, like you say, if you're from a family that hasn't encouraged that, they're going to get it from you at school, which I think is just worth its weight in gold.
Well, we talked a lot last week. We spoke about cultural capital, and that is, you know, the education. It's about the education that children receive from home, as well as at school. And I think that obviously there's a disparity in it for all sorts of different reasons. And obviously your children, Greg and Ruby, despite the fact you've not tried to make them into history, they are, just because they're aware of its power and they're aware of its importance. And I think our job as educators is to try and give everybody that equal opportunity access to the information, and try to just engender that passion, that interest. And you're not going to be able, no child is going to be interested in every single topic we teach in history. They might have no interest in the Norman Conquest, but then they might do Empire and Slavery in year 8, and suddenly it's the thing that hooks them into it. And that's why we need to be varied, but it also is why I think we do need to, certainly my school needs to, and every school needs to, really start to access and take advantage of local history now, especially now that a lot of it is digitized, not in the case of what you were looking for, but in the, you know, we live in an age where the access to information has never been has never been stronger. And so if we're not taking advantage of those things, then we're doing them a disservice, really, and indeed doing ourselves a disservice. I mean, I've lived in the Home Valley I'm 34. I lived away for about 6 years, so most of my life, and there's still loads of things I don't know, and loads of things that I've wondered over the years and never bothered to go and find out. I remember spending a week in a summer when I was about 15 trying to dig out an old caved-in mine shaft on the hills above Hayed Edge. And we gave up because we couldn't dig it out, and it was not the sort of thing we should have been doing anyway. And don't do it, kids, if you're listening. But what I'm saying is, I never bothered to go and research what that mine shaft is, and it wasn't until I was in my 20s I thought, hang on a minute, I want to find out what that was, and then I did, and I found out that it was just a mine, but there were stories about the miners, and there were stories about what they were doing there, and growing up around here, you can take it for granted just how much history is around us, you know.
Like you say, I mean, I mentioned before I'm a comer in, but and I was chatting to a friend called Andy Leader who does the amazing Made in Home for photography. And on my side of the Pennons, on the Sailor-Bridge side, growing up, my dad used to drag me out on a Sunday looking for the crashed aircraft from World War II. And you know, that was a bit of a thing over there. I'm not quite sure why, whether it was just the circles that my dad moved in. So that's why I was looking for old cogs and broken. When I moved here, hardly anybody seemed to know about it. And And I remember saying to Andy, you know, so Andy kind of went out and did that, and that's a bit of a thing for him now. And it's stuff like that. There's so much that you can sort of share. To me, it's all about sharing, and there's no one-upmanship involved in all of this. It's partly because there isn't that academic side of things at the local and community history level, and it is a lot more about sharing information, which I hope people will get out of this session today. And already you and I have been sitting listening to Lorna going, ooh. So everybody get your pen and pencil at the ready now, because Lorna's going to come in and give you some gems that you can toodle on down to the archives. And here she is.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Although where I'm based is Huddersfield, we do cover the whole of Kirklees, and there are archive materials in a lot of other libraries, particularly Cleckheaton, Batley, Dewsbury and Home Firth, and they have a special machine for looking at the microfilm as well. So as libraries gradually start to recover and reopen, there'll be a lot of places people can go for information. So to describe what we do, in local studies libraries, we tend to have things like the things that Christine has described so well. There are newspapers, there are microfiche. Rather than the film, there are the little fiches that you put in that tell you about marriages in local parish churches and things like that. There's records of cemeteries, there's books about local places, specialist things about the local trains, the local canals, the local mining. There's things about there's lots of photographs, old historic photographs, and I'll show you where you can find some of those online as well. There's loads of maps, and I love maps. And there's information about businesses, and there's things like electoral records and trade directories. All sorts of things that you might want to have a look at to find out a bit more about where you live or your family. I'm really conscious that some people do find it hard to do family history, either because there's been family breakdown or they don't quite know all their ancestors, or because they've travelled from another country and it's hard to find records from another part of the world. But there sometimes are ways to find a little bit about your particular family. I was just interested seeing Dave's big box, and I have beside me, strangely, a little bit of my family history that I did a while back, and I taped it on lots of pieces of A3 paper and spread it all over the floor, because although there are actually free forms you can download from the internet to write each member of your family on and who their parents were and who their parents were. I did find it easier to put it in a big diagram so that I could see who was related to who. And it gets more complicated. Well, it's very complicated because each generation you double the amount of ancestors you have. So it doesn't take long to get into the hundreds and even the thousands of ancestors who might have come from lots of different places. And then also, even if you're just thinking about your grandparents or great-grandparents, they might have had lots of siblings, aunts and uncles, cousins, and it can get quite a big thing to study. We get all sorts of people coming into study local or family things. We also get lots of students. They tend to be some of the younger people researching old buildings and architecture and the history of places, perhaps for their studies or just because they're fascinated about the street they live. People come in to find out about old footpaths, old ruins, all sorts of things. Next to Huddersfield, the section with the local studies in there is also Kirklees Archives. Now, Kirklees Archives are part of West Yorkshire Archives. And the way we think of it is that Kirklees Archives are a separate organisation that came about because there used to be the West Riding Council. And they have branches in places like Wakefield and Bradford. And they have things that weren't published, whereas we tend to have things that have been published, books, and we have theses and dissertations and newspapers and magazines and We have sort of things like periodicals from old schools, old businesses, all sorts of strange things. You could find a school magazine sometimes. And they tend to have things that aren't published. So they might have minutes of meetings of an organisation or diaries that somebody's done. There's a wonderful diary of a woman who was a suffragist in the times of the suffragettes and suffragists. So there's lots of kind of records where people are describing their everyday life and what meetings they've been to and what they've done. And they have a website that you can look at. Should I share my screen now? Do the others think I should do that and just show you an Ancestry page? Here we go. I'm just going to try and do this. While we've been in lockdown, a lot of people haven't been able to get into the libraries to look at things, but we've managed to allow the permission we have for library members to look at Ancestry in libraries work at home. So if you are a library member or become one, you can do it online. You can then log in as if you were going to look at the catalogue or renew a book. And then once you've logged in, you can actually see a link to Ancestry. And this is the library version of Ancestry here. And you can search all sorts of things. So for an example, I'm going to press search and just show you census and electoral rolls. I'm sure Ancestry won't mind me advertising their website for them. You can choose the UK Census collection. There's a lot of information about the census, which of course has just happened this year, and it happens every 10 years. And there are records online from 1841 every 10 years, at the moment up till 1911. So if I was going to look, say, for a street, say I was going to look for Honley, as we're talking about Honley today, Honley in Yorkshire, and I don't have the name of a person, but say I was going to look up Southgate as a street and see if I could find anything about somebody living there. I'm just going to try. And it has found here, the summary books aren't quite so useful. It's found the 1911 census, and going down it would find others. So on this 1911 census, for example, if I clicked onto it, I'd find a Thomas Henry Carter, age 26, living in Southgate. And you can actually view the original census records for 1911, and you can zoom in and see this Joseph Carter's signature at the bottom of his record and see what the family did. So this is somebody living in Southgate, to Joseph Carter. Oh, Joseph's 62 and his wife Emily Charlotte is 60, and their children Thomas and Margaret Hannah, adult but living with them. And the dad is an oat bread baker, has an oat bread baker. He's an oat bread baker with a bakery. Of course, oat cakes. I'm a Cummeran as well, and come from the potteries where people eat a lot of oat cakes, Staffordshire oat cakes. But they used to make lots of them in those days. And his wife's his assistant. His son's a railway clerk. Were a lot of people working for railways in 1911. And the daughter's a cloth mender working for a cloth manufacturer. So you can find out all sorts of things about who lived in your house or your street. You could go back in time and trace that family in the other censuses. Another thing you can do using Ancestry is look at this card catalogue. If you say search and search the card catalogue, a lot of people don't know to do this, but you could put things in like West Yorkshire. You could also try putting as a search term something like England or UK, or you could put, say, Poland or Ukraine or India, and see what records occur related to that place. There are some international records. There are two big sites. There's Ancestry and Find My Past, and they both have records from different parts of the world. And this one gives you a list of all the different kinds of West Yorkshire records you can look at. So there's apprenticeship records, bastardy records, people who where the father was being made to pay for an illegitimate child. Rate records, police records, reformatory schools, the militia, and things like who ran the pubs, alehouse licenses. All these sorts of things are interesting. Now, should I share another screen? There's various screens I could save. One of the things that I love is maps. And if you're at home and you can't get to the library to look at the maps, or you don't have one, you can go on to this National Library of Scotland map site, maps.nls.uk, and you can find maps from all over the UK, not just Scotland. And I love using this side-by-side viewer. I won't do it just now because some of it's copyrighted, but if you see, you can zoom in towards the bit of the UK you may be interested in, and you can see an old map from about 1900 on one side and something like a modern map on the other side, like a Google Bing type map. So you can do all sorts of things with that map site, and you can see side by side the place you live in now and what it was like before. Another thing that you might want to look at if you were looking for local records is the Kirklees Image Archive. So here I've clicked on search the images on kirkleesimages.org.uk, which is managed by Kirklees Museums and Galleries. And you can actually buy photographs of these if you want, or you could just look at a small image or download it for your studies, a small one. And that's a picture of Southgate in Honley. So it shows you can see all, that's 1910. There's all sorts of pictures you can find. Another website, because we were talking about the Second World War, I was explaining to David that there are lots of things on this Imperial War Museum site. Are you able to see what I'm showing at this? Oh no, you're not. I'm in the wrong bit. I'm going to come off that. There's an Imperial War Museum site as well. I'll stop sharing my screen for a minute and see if the others want to come in and chat about it.
Oh, that was fantastic.
Right.
And also
brilliant.
I was thinking what you were saying about writing things down and talking to people, but actually you can very easily record an old person in your neighbourhood or your granny talking about something. Nowadays you could just record their voice and get them to chat. I've even got an amazing film of my grandmother playing in the park with some of my relatives. Wow. And to have my gran on film on a, well, it's a DVD now, but it was somebody's old-fashioned kind of film filmmaker. So all sorts of different ways of recording people. And for great old films, as well as YouTube, try the BFI player, the British Film Institute player. And there's also a Yorkshire Film Archive. And both the Yorkshire Film Archive and the BFI player have a lot of free things to watch. On the BFI, you could, of course, watch major movies. But if you look for their free films, there's lots of local ones. There's ones about the wartime. And you can look up a place like Huddersfield, and you can watch people in 1901 in Huddersfield coming out of a mill by the river at the bottom of town, and you see all the women with their shawls and the kids with their caps and things. It's amazing to be able to experience history in so many different ways nowadays.
I think I mean, the maps bit, I just love maps. And we discovered that you can order images from most archives. So if you're looking up a relative or a street, all over my house, I've got, photographs of Stalybridge, Ashton, Huddersfield, Honley, Netherton, and maps of them. And they just make such a very special present for somebody as well. So, it's great being able to look them up as well, but also ordering them, from the archives as well. And And I think the thing that you're saying about the films, for young people in particular, it brings it to life. I mean, my son still says to me, Mum, you know, in the old days when you were little, and that's just what I used to say to my parents. And I really believed the world was black and white. And there's a History of Stalybridge Facebook page, which absolutely is fantastic. And people, you know, they do the whole colorization of the photographs. And I know some people kind of go, well, I prefer it when it isn't. But I just think it just changes the way you view things, and it just brings the humanity back somehow. The fact that people had different colours. So, you know, I think there's whatever, you know, aspect of whether you're a visually inspired person or whether it's a written word in the records, there's something for everybody. And you've just done a brilliant tour of it there for us.
Trying to describe.
No, well, there's actually we've had some lovely comments come in, and there's a great comment here from Joe Hilton Jones here, who says, you know, I've been delighted to find I've got ancestors from the late 1800s in Almondbury, Homebridge, Holmfirth, and Osterley next to Digley, and only 10 minutes from where she lives. And I found somebody in Huddersfield as well, and it turns out, you know, Horsefall, who was killed by the Luddites. You know, my great grandma was Bertha Horsefall. So, you know, you do move to an area and you presume you've got no links with it, and then it turns out actually you have. So how would you what would you suggest really that Jo looks at first if she wants to do a little bit of digging, Lorna?
Well, it's quite useful to try and find addresses that they lived. The census is a really good one. If you're trying to do family history, it's always good to do it step by step. So start with your parents, try and get written down exactly names, dates of marriage, dates of death, dates of birth. But of course, dates don't tell you very much, do they? And you want to know what life was like for them. You want more of that social history. Yes. So if you go back to, say, 1911, as well as being the one where people signed, it also tells you things like how many children were born in a marriage and how many have died before 1911. So you might find that you ancestors have had 10 children and 2 of them have already died. And that kind of thing brings a bit more to life what life was like for them. And in 1911, of course, suffragettes didn't always want to fill in a form, and they boycotted them because they felt that if they weren't allowed to vote, they shouldn't be needing to fill in the census. They were non-people. So if they didn't count, they wouldn't fill it in. But then, so a combination of census and then in between the 10-year censuses, trying to find the family living somewhere. There are electoral registers, and some of those are online. Some of them are on Ancestry, and some are in libraries, in whatever part of the country or place you're looking. And then there are birth, marriage, and death records, which are the General Registry Office's records, which are the official ones. But it was only from about 1937 that it was required that people register a birth or register a death. Before that, it was just church records and chapel records that you're looking at, because they didn't have to officially record it. But as you said about finding a signature on your ancestor's death record, you can find the marriage register and who the witnesses were in the church records and a little bit more information. You might find out the dad's name. Nowadays, they've just changed it, I think. So the mum's name and job goes on a marriage record, as well as the father of the couple. So you can find out, you know, a name, and then you need to sort of match up more than one bit of information so that you're absolutely sure that the John Smith you're looking at is the right John Smith, because there might be so many of them living in the same town. So try and get 2 bits of information that point to the same date. And thinking about the war, if you do go on Ancestry, have a look at the 1939 register. So the 1939 register was done before they started having identity cards and rationing at the beginning of the Second World War. So we've got to wait till next year before we can see 1921 census, because they wait 100 years. So it's privacy for anybody who's still alive. They assume that most people have died after 100 years. So then you can look at their personal information. And so the 1939 register is interesting because some lines are blacked out because those people might still be alive. But you can find a family and you can find people, and it tells you their exact date of birth and where they're living, their exact address. So that's a sort of another way to find people about that period of time.
That's fantastic. Thank you. I think one of the things that if you don't know where to begin, and it's just so massive, isn't it? One of the things that I wish that I'd done or been told to do many years ago was to look at the specific parts of history that I'm interested in, and then look for an individual in my family who lived around that time, and then maybe head for the newspapers and the census and focusing on one person in a specific part of history that was of interest to me. And I think the bit that's leapt out at me the most is the Lancashire cotton famine, which is so under researched, and they had such people starving to death, tens of thousands of people, just the most horrendous poverty in the 1860s in Lancashire, and an obvious impact on Yorkshire as well. And I fell about it. I came about it topsy-turvy, really. I was researching Robert, and then I stumbled across the bread riots, and I wish now that I'd kind of learned about it in that way. So that's something that I would kind of encourage people, and particularly young people, to do, to get them into understanding a little bit more about how the archives and the materials that you can access. And again, just from chatting to people in your neighbourhood, to your grandparents, to your relatives, because there is this intergenerational thing of, like as a mum, for example, I'm that busy doing the mum stuff and the work stuff. I don't always listen to what my parents are saying, whereas the grandchildren do, and my daughter in particular. I'll just give you a quick example of my mum and dad sent us a family WhatsApp picture of them somewhere next to some building, industrial building, said, "Where are we?" And the rest of us were going, no idea what's going on there. And my daughter said, "That's where Granddad first met Grandma and asked her out on a date." And the rest of us were going, "How on earth do you know that?" It's because she listened. She listened, and we didn't, because we were busy ploughing on through life. And I think that's, the great thing is that the fact that, she got one up on us all. And I'm sure she's very pleased with that. But it is things like that really precious memories that haven't necessarily ever been written down.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had some fab comments coming. I think you're going to get lots of queries tomorrow now, Lord.
Oh dear.
Sorry. But
if people do want to ask us things, this is our email address.
No chance, yeah.
So you could try emailing. We might not reply straight away. There's just a few of us beavering away, sometimes at home, sometimes managing to go in and look for things for people. So that would help. Sorry, carry on, Christina.
No. I mean, Dave, would you like to add anything? Because we've only got a few minutes left now. So.
I'm just blown away listening. Honestly, I could listen to this all night. It's fantastic. As a history nerd, it's just right up my street. Bringing back memories of my own. I mean, one of my formative experiences of becoming interested in history was being about 9 years old at junior school in Upperthon, and we had to do a project on evacuation, on the Blitz. And me and my friend, who was also called Dave, we realised that this old couple who lived round the corner from us were both evacuees. And so I remember sitting in their conservatory for about 3 hours, and we tape recorded them talking about their experiences. And it turned what, at the time felt like this completely alien, distant past. It turned it into living history. We were there talking to these people. And I ended up knowing them for a long time until they passed away a few years ago. And that was a really emotional and formative experience. And it's probably one of the reasons I've ended up being a history teacher. It's probably one of the stepping stones towards it becoming my great passion. And then also, just when you're talking about the archive footage of, these very old videos, there is on YouTube footage from Halifax in about, I think it's something ridiculous like 1901 or certainly the early 1900s. And the thing that strikes me in that is the look on the people's faces when they're being filmed. And I showed it to some kids at school, and they're like, "Well, why are they looking at the camera?" And I say, because they've never seen a camera before.
Yeah.
They've never seen one. It's the first, they're all fascinated by it. And it's not like nowadays where everyone's looking at the camera because they're vain. It's because these children are just like, what is this thing that's pointing in our faces? And it's just all these brilliant things. the more resources we've got as educators, the more tooled up we are to engage them, to engage the pupils in it, and that is the most important thing, because it's theirs, it's their history, and at our school we've got an incredible success rate with engaging them. We have a massive uptake at GCSE, and the other thing I'm really excited to use, which you both mentioned, is this maps website that Lorna showed us last week, which we unfortunately can't show on screen. You know, looking at the site of Honley High School before there was even the grammar school there, I think we looked at 1914, and there was a school there called the Mill School. I had no idea about it, neither did anybody else at school, and I want to know what the Mill School was. And it's all just these little windows into the past, and the more windows we've got, the clearer the picture will be, and the more access we can get to it. And I'm just thoroughly excited, and I feel quite excited about it also.
I think, out of all the, somebody might pick me up on this, but of all the subjects that are taught, particularly, at GCSE level, this one I feel is really grassroots. And if you just look, again, looking at from both sides of the hills, where I am from and where I now live, it's very much volunteer led. It really is. Here we've got, the Huddersfield Explores website, we've got Alan Brooks Underground Histories website, and the amount of stuff that has gone into that is absolutely top-notch professional level, yet they've just given it. I can't think of any other discipline really where people have been so generous and so studious to such a high degree. It's a gift, isn't it? And I think we're very lucky in this part of the world. I'm sure there's other regions in Britain that are very good, but these happen to be my regions that I'm very proud of, and I think it's just great to see a local school, especially given the year that you've had and given the year that your pupils have had doing GCSE. It's great to see the enthusiasm still there.
We just love it. We just love teaching history, and we love the engagement that we get from the children, and we love getting them excited about things that, the Industrial Revolution, I remember thinking that was boring when I was at school.
Yeah, me too.
Now, I wrote the scheme of work for it, and the reaction the kids get, and the real, just finding those hooks just to get them invested and get them engaged.
Yeah.
And things I hope they'll remember for the rest of their lives, and indeed, I hope loads of them go on to study it at a higher level. Because it's the best subject, basically, and I'm not going to make any.
You're not wrong.
I think we should give a plug to repeat what Christina said about things like Underground Histories and Huddersfield Exposed, and also there's things like there's a Batley History Group. There's a Honley Civic Society, there's Huddersfield Local Civic Society, there's all Local History Society, there's all sorts of local voluntary groups where people
got specific projects, haven't they? They've all got stuff that like Honley Civic Society, the plague pits in the woods, and it's just stuff like that. That's the stuff that gets the kids interested. Oh, let's go to the woods and find some dead bodies, and but they've done all that work, often in partnership with universities and academics, but they're the instigators of it all, and they're the ones really that I think should get the credit. I'm biased, but I do.
Okay, we've got some brilliant comments. So I'd just show a few before we finish. So from Carol.
Oh, thanks, Carol.
Thank you.
Fascinating discussion with so much information. Thank you all. And then we've got brilliant Christina. I'm putting together a fascinating family.
Yeah.
And then we've got, will this talk be available to watch later? Yes, it will. Yes, you can watch it on Catch Up. It's on the library Facebook, YouTube.
I think we need to do a whole series though, because this is so popular. I'm just looking at the numbers of people watching this going, okay.
As well, during lockdown, local studies have been working with other groups and local enthusiasts, things like Discover Huddersfield, which provide lovely booklets with walks and have a great website.
Oh, they're great, yeah.
And with people over in Birstall as well. We did a Birstall co-ops walk recently, and we've done like a virtual walk on screen using Google Earth, which is great to use in school, by the way. And you can sort of zoom around and look at different places, and then find old photos in Kirklees image archive, and put together walks and descriptions of places, and it really is fun. And they're on the Kirklees Library's YouTube channel, and there's a special playlist for local history walks and talks. So
we've done the Lockwood one.
The playlist. Oh, the Lockwood one's nice.
Brilliant.
Okay. I just wanted to really quickly share my screen, which has.
I think I failed sharing my screen earlier. I was going to show you a little bit more than I did, but at least you saw Ancestry a little.
Yeah. So this is our ebook site, Overdrive, and it does have some local history books that you can borrow for free. So I just thought I'd show you that before we finish today. Okay. And then Lorna, I think you were going to tell us about a session coming up.
I'll put it along the bottom. If you can listen on the 20th of May at 1 p.m. or a bit afterwards, we've got a special guest from Edinburgh University, Hannah Rose Murray, who's a historian, who's an expert on the black abolitionists who escaped slavery in the United States and travelled to England. And in the 19th century, they went to all sorts of places, churches and church halls and all sorts of public buildings, and gave talks and lectures about slavery and how awful it was, and were campaigning for abolition and raising funds to help people escape from slavery. And it is fascinating. She's done a huge study. She's got an amazing website about Frederick Douglass. It's called Frederick Douglass something. Anyway, if you Google him, you'll probably find Hannah Rose Murray's site, and it's got a map of the UK showing places that they travelled to, and we're going to explore. So they've worked in collaboration with us and West Yorkshire Archives and other people in the local council to try and explore the places they came and who came to West Yorkshire in about 1830s, 40s, 50s, that kind of time.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Before we wrap up, could I also just mention a shout out for Tolson Museum, because if archives aren't your cup of tea, or if you can't get your kids to the archives, I just think it is one of the most fantastic museums, and can't wait for it to be open again. And it's free, and the amount of time and effort that's gone into the collections there, and just the history of the museum itself. And similar, to be honest, if you're ever over Ashton Way, very similar to the Tolson Museum is a Portland Basin Heritage Museum, which is another massive favourite of mine on the canal. So we've got these places as well. If you're the kind of person that doesn't do the whole looking at written material thing and you learn in a different way, you've got to get your plan in place for when the museums are open. So thank you everybody for all your contributions.
Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you, Dave, and thank you, Lorna and Nicola, as always.
Yeah, thanks everyone for watching as well. No, thanks a lot, and see you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.